Can we recite Surah Fatiha for the blessings, for the increase of blessings on this household and on this congregation, for the poor souls who have lost their lives in Palestine, Lebanon, and elsewhere, be they Muslims or not, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring peace to our hearts, stability, and grant us with insight that we improve the situation of our humanity and begin to care for each other. Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين شفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحابه المنتجبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى قيام يوم الدين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you for making the time and attending, and thank you Hassan Bhai and Faiza for arranging, and I'm absolutely honored and delighted to be in your presence and having this opportunity to share a few thoughts of our most beloved. A man who cannot be described by words. He is a phenomena that needs to be studied gradually, slowly, calmly, and then for us to let the truth of his being sink within us. In order to create and set that context, Ja'far bin Abi Talib was sent to Abyssinia with a group of early migrants from Mecca due to the severe persecution that the first Muslim community faced. So they went and sought refuge with An-Najashi, the king of Abyssinia, who was known for his justice and righteousness and who was Christian by faith. The Meccans sent a delegation of 2 people, and maybe there were others with them. Amongst them was Amr ibn As, with gifts and bestowals for the king. So they said to Najashi that these people are outlaws, and we come to take them back. And of course, there was a tribal agreement that if an outlaw escapes, you hand them back over. So at that point, the king summoned Ja'far and the group of migrants that were there. And he said, "What are these people saying? Why do they want you back?" He said, "It is because we have decided to follow a prophet from amongst ourselves that God has sent." Najashi got intrigued. He said, "What does this prophet say?" He said, "O king, we were people warring constantly. We ate dead carrion, dead meat. We were unclean. We worshipped idols. We did not honor our oaths. We were not accustomed to speaking the truth. We accused chaste women. We consumed the wealth of orphans. There was lawlessness. The wealthy and the powerful amongst us exploited the poor, and that was the societal norm. He came. He told us to turn to one God, to break our idols. He told us to trust in God. He asked us to be clean. He asked us to honor our commitments. He asked us to speak the truth. He taught us to abstain from every form of falsity, from unchaste actions, to not to accuse people wrongfully, to honor the orphan and to care for them. This is what he did for us, and hence we are being persecuted. So the king turned to the delegation from Mecca. He said, I will not let them go, for their message is our message. What their prophet has taught them is what our messenger taught us. So at that point, in order to incite the king, he said, well, Amr ibn As, ask them what their messenger teaches them about Jesus, the one you believe in. So Najashi turned to Ja'far and he said, tell me, what does your prophet say about Isa? Now at that point, the Surah Maryam had been revealed. And of course, the potency of those words are amazing. وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ مَرْيَمَ. Ja'far did not know what else to say. So he repeated the verses, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ مَرْيَمَ إِذْ انْتَبَذَتْ مِنْ أَهْلِهَا مَكَانًا شَرْقِيًّا. Recount the story of Mary as she sought a refuge in a distant place from her people. فَأَرْسَلْنَا إِلَيْهَا رُوحَنَا. And we sent to her our spirit. And the spirit bestowed upon her due to her chest state. And there came Isa. And Isa said to her, O mother, worry not. When you see anyone, tell them, I have taken an oath of silence, and point towards me. They said, how do we talk with one who has taken birth and in the cradle? He said, Inni Abdullah, I am the slave of God. Atani al-kitab wa ja'alani nabiyya. He has given me a book and he has made me into a prophet. When he recited these verses, An-Najashi began to weep at the potency and the strength of the language and the way the whole thing is being depicted and structured. He drew a line upon the earth and he said the difference between you and I or us is no more than this one line. Now this sets the context as to when the prophet came, how the people were like. Now let us draw our minds back to what this prophet did. Now think about it. He changed them from warring people who had no self-confidence, so many idols. Every idol they would offer offerings to. Now I do not want to be sarcastic or offensive, but whoever attends these talks, they know ultimately this man can't control himself anyway. It was the very sentiment that today we have infused within Islam. We have these mannats, don't we? There's nothing wrong with mannats, but it talks about our sense of insecurity, right? We are very insecure, so we do mannat, don't we? Sometimes we give to the poor, not in order to fill the stomach of a starving person, but in order for Allah to dispel evil from us. The motivation is not the care for the creature of God, but the motivation is the care for ourselves, and that stomach becomes a means, doesn't it? It is true. Today we worship God as a means to our own safety. We are not worshiping God because God is worthy of worship. If I had no fear, if I had no danger, if I had an unending life, if there was no death, and if paradise was mine for taking, there would be no need in me for God. These were the very sentiments those people had. They worshipped idols through insecurity and fear. They had no confidence within themselves like our community today. We have no confidence. They had vendettas that would carry on for generations. For petty things, if one person's horse preceded another person's horse in drinking water, they would start killing each other. Not all of them were like that, but many were. That was the societal setup. They would bury daughters because they frowned upon having daughters due to their own historical past, which we don't have the time to discuss as to how that practice came in. And they would not sin in burying their daughters. Some of them may even have sacrificed their children to God in order to procure the favor of God. These were the people who did not only not care about human tragedy, but created human tragedy in order to benefit from that human tragedy. From those people who were confined to the deserts of Arabia, who knew no more than survival on a daily basis, in which the might procured all the rights. There was no law. Exploitation was a societal norm. From those people who are totally disunited without any form of discipline to a nation that not only unites the Muslims but calls on for a greater unity between people of Abrahamic faiths. And indeed, when the Prophet went to Medina, the Charter of Medina brought about the first nation comprising of the Muslim who had invited him in Medina, the migrants who went with him, the indigenous population of Medina that comprised of Aus and Khazraj, and the powerful Jewish clans. And maybe there were some Christians, but there were many pagans. And he allowed them to resolve their conflicts through their tribal customs. It's a very pluralistic system. Where do you get a brain like that from? When he leaves this world, he has created an ummah from people who were illiterate to fathers of modern science, from people confined to the sands of Arabia to explorers, from people without any confidence to people who are so empowered that they have now contributed to a civilization. How did he do this? Now, just to set the context a bit more, you know the scenes of the Battle of Uhud when the Muslims lost. And it was the best thing that had ever happened to them that they lost. And if we get time, we'll discuss it. But at that point, we find this incident that a person had fallen. The water bearer goes to him and says, drink water. He says, there's another one ahead of me who is in more of a need. He goes to the one ahead. He says, there is another one ahead of me. He goes to that one, finds him dead. He had died. He came to the first had died. He went to the second had died. Now think about this. From people, not all of them I said, but majority who are barbaric, to people now who on their last breaths are preferring the other. How did he bring about such a phenomenal change? You see, we are missing on the central message of the problem. What has he done? What did he do? Did he change one factor? Two factors? What did he do? Was it purely a spiritual message? Was it a social message? Was it a political change that he brought in? Now, before I go any further, I was in Mecca. And I've always been a very defiant soul. I'm not proud of that. It's just the way my nature is. So where people wear slippers with minimal covering on the top of their feet, and as a result, their feet ache, and they curse the whole world, and get angry, and lose the spirituality of Hajj. But they say, we've done Hajj. I said, no, I'm going to wear sandals. Because there's nothing in the text that says you can't wear straps. So I remember I met a group of Hujjaj en route to Mina from Muzdalifah. It's a deadly walk. If you survive that walk, then you thank Allah. And if you survive that walk, then the shaitan is going to then obviously stone you to death. But if you survive all of that. So I was wearing sandals, and they got very offended. And they said, how can you wear sandals? You're supposed to wear the minimal feet covering. Now, obviously, it was a bit of a struggle, but I left it. After 4 years, they decided that sandals were fine. And they all started wearing sandals. And I said, look, it takes 4 years to convince people to go from chappal to sandal. How did he do it all in 23 years? Isn't that amazing? From chappal to sandals in 4 years. Now imagine, you would need the life of Nabi Nuh plus many more 1,000 years to address everything that is wrong. So how did he do it? We get reformers. Reformers come on the basis of something that is very absurdly wrong, and they address that issue. Like economic inequality, for example, or rights system that has become outdated, and the issue and they reform the system of rights of children, rights of women, so on and so forth. How did this man, who has taken birth as an orphan, who has worked for his daily bread, who has sent proposals to women only to be refused because he did not have a father or a big inheritance. We are not told these things from the pulpit because we want to, streamline our own madhab and our own sect. How can a person who has grown up in that environment, the harsh environment, societal environment, which is unkind, how can he institutionalize a system of rights of women, equal standing of women before God? That's what his Quran says. The rights of divorce, that's what the Quran says, Surah Baqarah. A woman has a right for divorce through khula, for example, from maftadat bihi, by giving the fidya, or the rights of ownership for women. When he introduces hijab, the hijab was not there to curtail the female personality. In fact, it was to give women equal status within his own societal setting, because that's when man started thinking of women as equal social beings, because at that time it was only the very high class dignitaries whose women would wear the covering, not any woman. And we know that from history. How did he come out with all these laws? How did he humanize slavery? How did he institutionalize rights of orphans? How can a man do all of these things, given his own circumstances of poverty, of hardships, of enemies that he had? How can he have such a mind? This is something we need to think of. Now, the Orientalists have written that when we look at Muhammad Rasulullah, we are baffled, because he did not have the backing of the church that Jesus has. I do not mean to compare any prophet with another. They are all equal. La nufarriq bayna ahadin min rusuli. We do not distinguish between any one of his messengers. This is what the Quran says. All of them are equal par. But he did not have the backing of the church. He did not have the legions and the armies that Caesar had. With the death of 400 some people, he unites majority of Arabia. He leaves, and after that the Muslims expand, conquer Jerusalem. And the way he teaches them, when the second Khalifa conquered Jerusalem, the Jews were banished from Jerusalem, you know that, right? For 300 odd years. He invited them back in. He said, no, the Abrahamic faiths will live harmoniously side by side. And the Jewish writers write that that was the best period in history for the Jewish people. It was a just period. How did he make such a massive change where Jews and Christians couldn't withstand each other? Little clans were fighting constantly. How did he bring about this phenomenal change? Now think about it. They also write, the Orientalist, Jesus spoke in the cradle, breathed life into dead bodies, fashions a bird and breathes into it and it becomes a bird. Moses throws a staff and it becomes a serpent. He wields his staff and the seas part. Abraham falls into the inferno, it becomes a garden. This man has nothing. He has no miracles. And I want to maybe discuss that later on, that he did not perform any miracles according to the Quran. They ask him, bring a book from the sky and then let the fire consume it. And there was a reason why the Jewish community was asking this. There's a background to all these miracles. They are recorded there within human history. Why these particular miracles? The Quran says, tell them, O Muhammad, Subhana Rabbi, hal kuntu illa bashara rasula. Glory be to my Lord. Am I but a mortal messenger? I don't have all these miracles that you want. I don't have any of them. I am miracle-less. Quran is the biggest miracle, obviously, and that's the only miracle that he has, nothing else. And we can talk about that later on. How can a person who is in such a disadvantaged state bring about such a phenomenal change, a shift in paradigm, change the trajectory of humanity, realign them with the principles of growth, and then leaves them? And a religion that is so comprehensive, so pluralistic, so progressive. This, our present state of the Muslim community right now, is alien to the Islam Prophet Muhammad left, by the way. This is not the real Islam he institutionalized. It was very different the way he was and his understanding. Today we say this is non-Muslim. But when he left, he taught them that when you see the non-Muslims, learn from their administration, learn from their politics. It's yours. All knowledge is your knowledge. Take it even from China. Whatever knowledge comes to you, it's your heritage. Take it, no matter who's developed it, Muslim or non-Muslim. And that's where we find the first Khulafa. They did not have defined administrative systems. So they were learning from others, the Jewish people, the Christians. They were learning how to administer a state and how to grow it and how to keep the books and the accounting and so on and so forth. How did he give them such open minds? What did he do? Then he was so disadvantaged. Now here is something that the Muslims don't like to hear. You see, we have failed to understand the real prophet, the real substance of the man. We have created a mythical demigod out of a prophet, right? If he was like Jesus, salamullah alayhi, or others, then his message would not have been as impactful. It would not have been as real. His message is a real message. How did it all happen? So you see, Bibi Aisha was asked that who cultured and nurtured the Prophet. She said the Quran was the Prophet's mentor. And by Allah, this is exactly what the truth is. The Quran nurtures the Prophet. Now the Quran that we have today is compiled Quran, right? It's not in its chronological order, we know. Surah Alaq came first, right? And then Mudassir and Surah Duha and so on and so forth. And then after 13 years in Medina, Surah Baqarah comes. Surah Fatiha might have come in the early period of the Meccan phase. Yes? The prayers came gradually from night prayers to 3 times to 5 times. They all developed slowly. Zakat meant purification, preferring the other. Then the official zakat came afterwards, and then the Prophet set its figures, portions of zakat and the items of zakat. It all evolved. So if we look at the chronological Quran, we begin to see a different prophet altogether. We see journey of a man. We see the growth process of a human. We see a phenomenal person. The emergence of the grand, glorious being. What we see there is that it's a human journey of a man who is not the messenger coming to deliver a message, whose being is the message in the making. Now try and retain this. The Prophet, we are doing him discredit by saying he was the messenger. The Quran was the message. That is not the case. Read the Quran chronologically and read the history around it. The messenger is the living message. The person grew, and his growth process is the message. So the messenger is the message, and that is the secret of his success. And it's amazing. What the people around him saw is something we are not seeing because we are cut away from the context. And of course, we undermine the Prophet more than we've undermined anybody else. The Quran and the Prophet, these are the two most undermined sources of Islam, and these are the central sources and the very fundamental sources of Islam, we've undermined them. And I say this not trying to criticize or score a point or anything like that. So please take me, and I know you will. But I ask for you to pardon me if my words fall heavy on the ears or on the hearts. You see, he was a miraculous prophet who in himself is the miracle. You can't get better than him. So now, he is so fine and fine-tuned within himself, in his moral makeup. He is very just, very righteous, very compassionate. And we can see this before the revelation. We can see this in his history, that he was seen as a righteous person, as a truthful person, as a caring person. But we find that he did not, or he was not prepared for the weight of the message that was going to come upon him. Look at the Quran. It says, نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص بما وحينا إليك هذا القرآن وإن كنت من قبله لمن الغافلين. We narrate upon you the best stories by revealing this Quran, even though you were unaware of all of them previously. So this is the first time he is hearing them. Can you see that? Look at the Quran. Look at the way the Prophet says, لا أملك لنفسي نفعا ولا ضرا. I do not possess for myself any gain or any loss. I don't have all these gains or losses. لو علمت الغيب لاستكثرت من الخير وما مسني السوء. Had I known the unseen, I would have benefited greatly and no evil would have befallen me. I leave it all to Allah. I have none of these things. I am like one of you. قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُوحَى إِلَيَّ. Say to them, O Muhammad, I am a mere mortal like you, upon whom a revelation has come. You are seeing a man who is taking every step as a human being would, making his decisions. He is on a knife's edge. He doesn't know the future, it's not disclosed. He is growing and evolving beautifully. Look at the verses of the Quran. إِمَّا نُرِيَنَّكَ بَعْضْ مَا نَعِدُهُمْ أَوْ نَتَوَفَّيَنَّكَ مِنْ قَبْلِ. O Muhammad, we will either show you what we promise to do to them or we will kill you before that. So he doesn't know his fate for tomorrow. He doesn't know what tomorrow will bring. That is the way in which he has grown with the message. And as he grew with the message, the people saw this message. And amazingly, that is the thing that worked. You see, miracles could have never worked on them. I will perform a feat of miracle right now. You will forget about it by tomorrow. But if you were to get involved with a person so intimately, as that person changes, then so will you. As he is transformed from within, those who are observing him closely will also transform with him. So now, the verse comes, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم. Now these verses are profound because they have ancient history associated with them. History of humanity, a very ancient history that we have forgotten. In any case, now we have these narrations, both Shia and Sunni, and I don't differentiate between any. But he was quite perturbed and quite shocked as to what was this? What is this phenomena? In any case, then we find that either some other surahs were revealed that stand at night, remember God, cleanse yourself, or the wahi paused. But it has to be the case that certain surahs were revealed after that, and he was sharing them. So as he began to share them, there was a lot of skepticism in the minds of the people. That is he a soothsayer? There used to also be a belief that jinn come and manipulate the thoughts and they make people talk. So they were saying, is this jinn talking through him? What is happening to him? Because we haven't heard words like this before. Look at the way he fashions his words. It's not poetry, but perfect prose. So eloquent, such depth of meaning. Where is it all coming from? then suddenly there was a pause in revelation. There was no more revelation. Now here, that stop, according to the historians, was either for weeks or for months, and some say for 3 years. Now you can imagine, if the Prophet knew it all and knew what was going to come, he would not be in a state in which he was perturbed. But the Prophet sank into a state in which he was really perturbed. What is happening? Why has the wahi been ceased? Why is there a cessation of wahi? Now after a pause, this verse comes. وَالضُّحَى, this surah. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. By the morning brightness and the night as it casts its gown, your Lord has not abandoned you, and neither is he displeased with you. Look at the verses. Your Lord has not abandoned you. What does that say? It is looking at the psychology of the Blessed Prophet and addressing the Blessed Prophet directly. Your Lord has not forsaken you. He is not displeased with you. So you can see here that the Prophet Muhammad is experiencing all the human emotions that human beings are encountering. That was it all true? Was it not true? When he then pronounced these verses, the people around him said, yeah, he is not an imposter, because he would not be this genuine, that level of integrity that he is presenting, that he himself didn't know what's happened. And now he's gotten clarity, so he's saying it to us. So we find this huge phenomena that the Prophet is evolving. Early Meccan phase, middle Meccan phase, later Meccan phase. Early Medinan phase, middle Medinan phase, and the later Medinan phase. Now look at the change, and I'm going to take you to and fro. Those verses that the Quran has sent towards the end of the prophetic mission. هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله. He is the one who has sent his messenger with guidance and the righteous religion for it to prevail over all religion. Now, had this verse come in the initial days of revelation, the Prophet would not be worried at all. Can you see that? There would be no uncertainty in his mind. He would know, it's a done deal. I'm going to do this and I'm going to deliver my message. But the earlier verses were what? We might just kill you, O Muhammad. And this verse is repeated. We might just put you to death. We might just show you what we promised to do to them. The decision is ours. You just carry on. He is on a knife's edge. He doesn't know what tomorrow will bring. It is only after the conquest of Mecca or Sulh Hudaybiyah and after that these verses come, that now he will cause his religion to prevail. So as the Prophet has evolved, as Muslims have increased, as the tribal loyalties have changed, and as the tribes are moving towards him after the Sulh of Mecca, when he feels that confidence that yes, now it's going to be done, these verses come. Isn't that intriguing? The timings of these verses as opposed to the previous verses. So the Quran, step by step, is growing in its message as the Prophet is growing. The message is getting tweaked. Now, let me take you to the beginning parts. So the Prophet, on an occasion, is preaching to the chiefs of Mecca. And of course, he's very sincere. And the Quran bears testimony to this. إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. It's in the very early phases of Mecca. You are upon the peak of morality. The Quran did not make him into a moral being. He already was a moral being, and for that reason he was the ideal candidate. Even though the Bible talks about his coming, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. But these are deeper studies that we need to go through gently and slowly in due course of time, or somebody else will come and explain this to us, that how it is all a choreographed universe and everything is already played out and we are playing it out at the same time, simultaneously. So these are discussions that need to be had at some point. But at this point in time, the Prophet is seizing the opportunity, a very genuine person with a genuine message who wants to come and impart to the people a message that is good for them. So he finds a chief of Mecca. He seizes the opportunity, starts reasoning with him about his message. Now at that point, one of his, Abdullah bin Abi Makhsoom, I believe his blind companion, who was later on a companion, who came to him. Now I want us to construct this scenario in our minds. Now think about it. If we are initiating a project and we need the community to come on board, if we find one of the heads of the community or the great philanthropist of the community to talk with, we will seize that opportunity, not for any selfish motives or reasons, but for the sake of the objective, wouldn't we? We'll say, I have this opportunity to talk with this person. If he comes on board, it will do immense good to the objective and to the project. And the project is there to benefit the community and the poor and the deprived, right? So it's our natural human sentiment would be that we seize that opportunity. Now, if in the midst of that, somebody else comes to us, what would be our natural reaction? Our natural reaction would be to tell them, wait for a moment. Let me finish here and then I will turn to you. Is that what happens naturally with all of us? So the Prophet seized that opportunity. He was talking with that chief of Makkah. His blind companion comes to him. The Prophet looks at him, wait a while, and he turns away. Because, think about it, he's a blind person, so he doesn't know visually what the Prophet is doing. So you can imagine, he would probably tap the Prophet or be insistent, talk with me, talk with me. So the Prophet looked at him, wait for a while, and turned back. Now, the verse comes, Abasa wa tawalla. He frowns and he turns away. And ja'ahu al-a'ama. When the blind person came to him, وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ لَعَلَّهُ يَزَّكَّى. Oh Muhammad, how do you know? Maybe he's pure at heart and remembers Allah, and the remembrance benefits it. And as for the one who comes to you hastily, do you feel that is the one who is more befitting? What if his heart is unclean? Now, I would not have recited these verses. Had I been in the place of the Blessed Prophet, I would not have recited these verses. Why? Because these verses are reprimanding me. Can you see that? But the Blessed Prophet recited these verses. Even though apparently these verses are now teaching the Prophet conduct and behavior. Even though his act was purely sincere. But the Quran was teaching him a loftier truth. Now when he recited those verses, immediately his audience said, this is a truthful man. Because if he was a liar, he would never recite these verses. The verses are shaping his outlook. And he is sharing them with us. Unashamedly. He's saying, look, I'm like you. I don't know what's happening. I don't know the way the verses are going to unfold. I don't know what God will do to me or to you. I'm just following the message as it's coming. They saw the sincerity of that man, the truthfulness in how he was growing. Now, the Quran shifted the priorities in the mind of the Prophet. He said, look, the Quran said, look, I'm not interested in the rich and the wealthy and the powerful coming to my cause. I'm interested in sincere souls coming to my cause. So when a sincere soul comes to you, don't prioritize anybody else over them. Be fair and just. And although this is a part of your humanness, I acknowledge it. The Quran is saying, I acknowledge it. But this is the better way of doing things. So what happens here is that the Blessed Prophet is growing step by step by step. And it was this humanness of the Prophet that actually wins the day. They are saying, look, there are no miracles here, there are no superpowers here, but how is this man able to withstand all the pressure, not be wavered from his position? His state of morality is not compromised. His leaning towards God is not faltered with. He constantly goes from strength to strength. In every challenge, there is something new about him. His inner being is evolving so impeccably. He is becoming a complete person and a needless person through whatever he believes and his God-centricity. although the later community that came to Islam were not really endowed with the message of Islam. It was because of its might and economical gain and its positioning and power. When we know that the later Medinan phase, when people were flocking to Islam, it was because the tribes had to take a decision. Either we stay here and we get destroyed, or we join with them and we have protection and they are affluent community and we will flourish. So obviously, I'm talking about the early people, not the later people, the early Sahaba. So they are seeing that no, this man is learning. He is being educated. He is being taught, and he is, in accordance with that, he is flowing. There is that beautiful fluidity inside him. I'm still going through the Meccan phase. Now you look at Surah Bani Israel, I think. وَلَوْلَا أَنْ رَبَّتْنَاكَ لَقَدْ كِدْتَ تَرْكُنْ إِلَيْهِمْ شَيْئًا قَلِيلًا وَإِذًا لَأَذَقْنَاكَ ضِعْفَ الْحَيَاةِ وَضِعْفَ الْمَمَاتِ. O Muhammad, had we not held you together, you are about to recline towards them slightly. And had you done so, we would have given you twice the share of life and twice the share of death. We would have punished you. What happened was that the Meccans came to him at a bit of a later phase in the Meccan mission. And when they saw that, look, we can't really stop him. So they said to him, why don't you tone it down a little? A conciliatory tone, and we will start coming towards you. We'll listen to you. Don't use such harsh words against our belief systems and against our idols. Now, within his human state, why wouldn't he want that? This is the protocol of life that we all follow and we learn, don't we? We all say that these countries who are fighting, they need to find a diplomatic solution sometimes, don't we? And Prophet did practice diplomacy, and there were diplomatic solutions, but in that phase, there was no compromise. The Quran had zero compromise in that phase. So says Muhammad, you were about to recline to them somewhat had we not held your soul and heart together and prevented you from doing so. Had you reclined towards them, we would have chastised you. I imagine. And that's no way to talk to the Prophet. So you can see that the tone were not truly just for him. It was for the people to understand that, look, there is no compromise, and he is growing through this message. That at this point in time, there is another agency at play. So people immediately realize that actually he is getting messages from somewhere else properly. And it is not that he is intransigent and that he is adamant or stubborn. That is the way the message is coming to him. And he is following it through diligently and sincerely without compromise. Then you get, I think, in Surah Haqqa, another verse. It was actually directed to the Meccans, but talking about the Prophet. لَوْ تَقَوَّلَ عَلَيْنَا بَعْضَ الْأَقَاوِيلِ. If he starts saying anything about us that we haven't revealed, لَأَخَذْنَاهُ بِالْيَمِينِ. We will grab him by his right arm. وَلَقَطَعْنَا مِنْهُ الْوَرِيدِ. And we will cut his jugular veins off. This is about the Prophet. We will grab him by his right arm and we'll cut his neck off. Now people are hearing this, and it's a shocking experience. That this is the central figure, and this is how the revelation talks about him with this tone. Of course, the other tones are beautiful about the Prophet, but what I'm trying to emphasize here is that he was being educated, and he was being led on his mission. And as he was getting educated, he himself was flourishing and evolving in his godliness. And as they saw this, they too began to flourish, and they too began to evolve. And they took a lot of heart in seeing that, no, this is something very real. He is not talking from a position of superiority. He has put himself with us. And he's saying, look, as I am growing, you grow with me. So that was the wonderful, beautiful journey of the Prophet. Now you come to Medinan phase. Look at the difference in the tone of the Prophet when he comes of age fully. When he comes of age fully, the revelation does not make decisions for him. In the early Medinan phase, he was still a little unacquainted with how life works within a political scheme. So when they sent the raiding sort of expeditions. They were early when they went to Medina, obviously. They were sustained by the Medinan community, and the Medinan community could not sustain them, so they had to have some level of income, and they had no farms or date trees, so what do the Meccans do? So back in the day, of course, this was a norm, that the people who evict you from your houses and chase you away, you have the legitimacy of raiding their caravans. That was the norm of the day. So they were raiding caravans, but they were all unsuccessful. One of them that was successful, unfortunately, fell within the sacred month. Now, falling within the sacred month then poses a huge problem, because the Quran also acknowledged the sacred months as sacred, without any killing or warfare. Now here, this posed a huge challenge for the Prophet, that how did your man, they had no problem with raids, because that was a norm. But the problem was, how did your man put to death people in the sacred month? So when the spoils of war were brought, the Prophet refused to take them, because he said, oh, this was in the sacred month and I did not command them to do it in the sacred month. In Surah Baqarah, then Quran protects the Prophet and says, yes, sacred months are great, there should be no warfare. But driving people out of their houses and persecuting them is far worse than this. So the Quran then offered that protection to the Prophet, and we see that the Quran was constantly doing this for the Prophets on the decisions that he was taking. But in the later phase, Medinan phase, the Prophet was taking decisions and the Quran was then condoning them. So it's a very different Prophet from Makkah to Medina. So you get the verse, مَنْ يُطِعِ الرَّسُولِ فَقَدْ أَطَعَ اللَّهِ. He who is obedient to the Prophet or to the Messenger has indeed been obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now what the Prophet says is what Allah is saying. From that stage where he was being told that a blind man came to him and he turned away, or from that stage which says to him that if he were to make up things upon us, we would cut his jugulars, to this state that whatever he is saying, the decisions that he is taking are the decisions of Allah. So you can clearly see the evolution of a messenger. And in that, the messenger himself is the message. Now I want to discuss this in the days to come, and my time is over. Much to your disappointment. Well, I knew you would find that funny. But he, at the same time, was a very caring and a parental figure. So the people saw him as somebody who sacrificed for them. Whatever he was telling them was not for his own gain. You can imagine a person who was born without a father and whose mother dies in his infancy, who faces the hardships of an orphan, who works alongside his uncle and who asks for somebody's hand in marriage and is refused by his close ones. You can imagine if a person like that all of a sudden becomes a man who commands millions of acres of land and has created what resembles the League of Nations, and all under him, unlimited power. You can imagine that a man like that would procure gains for himself legitimately. He would have palace, wealth, food. But we find this in the biography of the Prophet, that there were no 3 days consecutively in which he ate. And we find this, and I'll talk about it, he used to tie stones upon his belly to stop the pangs of hunger from overpowering him. When he built the mosque, he himself would prepare the bricks and lay them. And they would say, we feel embarrassed, Ya Rasulullah. And he would say, no. Should I not share in all of this? When a stale bread was given to a traveler by Imam Ali, he said, I'm a traveler and I haven't eaten. And he said, look, go to this town, nearing town, Medina, and you will find food there. Go to such and such a house. He said, but I'm very hungry. He said, well, then have this. This is what I have. When he tried to bite into it, it was very stale. He said, how can you consume such food? And it says that he used to actually break it on his knee, and that's how stale it would be. So he said, how do you eat such food? So Imam Ali had tears in his eyes. And he said, this food would have been fit for a feast of Eid for my dear brother, the Messenger of Allah. He said, that is how humbly the Prophet lived. He would prefer his community over himself. So they see him growing. They see him uncorrupt. When he buries Bibi Khadija, he buries her in his shroud, in his cloak. He did not have enough money in her wealth to buy her a kafan, and given that she was such a wealthy woman. But he spent it all on his community. So people saw these things, and that is the reason they then emulated him. Now look at this man, and this is something that the Orientalists observe. Then the verse came in the Quran instructing the wives of the Prophet, وَذْكُرْنَا مَا يُتْلَى, and then make mention of whatever is being revealed on the Prophet inside your houses. So there came a point where the Prophet has no private life. His life became public life. So you can imagine a man who is under so much scrutiny, so much scrutiny. Today we have text that when we used to call him, he used to turn with his body, not turn his head. Yeah? We have text that he would not pick his teeth in public. He would cover his face, and then we have text that he would eat with 2 fingers and a thumb. We have text that he would chew his morsels this many times. Imagine a man who is being observed so closely and then not put a foot wrong. Can you imagine the caliber of this man? That was the message. I'm going to finish with this, a couple of incidents that how closely he was observed. And this was the secret, that the messenger was the message in the making. Actually, that was the real miracle. How can a human being do such a thing without the aid of a staff or the breath of God or the speech at birth? How can he do all of that? People would come and gift him things. So there were his companions sitting around him. And somebody came and gifted him a fruit. So the Prophet cut a slice and took a bite. And then he ate the whole slice. Then he cut another one, then another one, then another one. He turned to the man. He thanked him and he prayed for him. And then the man left. And now the Sahaba, because they are humans and naughty as well, they said, Messenger, it must have been a very good tasting fruit. Because normally you share with us, but this time around you ate the whole thing. He said, actually it was a very bitter fruit. And I knew, and I felt, if I gave it to you, you may make faces or make comments that would be injurious to his heart. So after eating the first slice, I decided to eat the whole thing and thank him for his sincere gift and intention. Imagine a man who is that vigilant. Imagine, how do you get a person like that? Moses has a staff, yet his anger is so much that he pulls his brother, who's also a messenger, by his hair and his beard. And then asks him later on, well, why did you do this? Obviously, you ask first, right? Before you pull somebody by the hair and beard. But he's a messenger. He's a grand messenger. And he threw the tablets according to the Quran. وَأَلْقَ الْأَلْوَاحِ, yani in rage. That's Moses, Salamullah alayhi, the great messenger. And this is Rasulullah, so vigilant, so conscious of himself, of those around him. When people observed this, that's when they said, this is not a message that he is giving us. This is a message he is living. And then they began to emulate him, love him, and change with him. We have a hadith within the Sunni literature that on the day of Qiyamah, the angels will appear upon the place where the Blessed Prophet is buried. And the angels will talk with each other and they will say, who will awaken him? So Jibreel will turn to Mikael and say, Mikael, awaken him. And Mikael says, I feel a sense of hesitation and embarrassment in my soul. How do I wake such a man? So they will say to Jibreel, you wake him up because you are most acquainted with him. So Jibreel will awaken him. The Prophet will awaken. And he will say, what day is this, O Gabriel? And he will shake the dust of his shroud and say, it is the promised hour, O Messenger. And as soon as he hears that, he will say, where is my community? And Jibreel will say, Allah has been true to you. He has not taken any accountability from your community. As he said to you, he will wake you up first and you will intercede for all of them. And that's the Messenger and his care and love for all of us. I will stop there. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.